It was a day like any other, till it wasn't. The call came, and suddenly my whole world was shattered into pieces I couldn't begin to pick up. I stood there, phone in hand, unable to process what I'd just been told. My son, my Roz the boss, was gone. Just like that. How do you even begin to describe a moment like that? Honestly, I don't think there are words. It's like all the air leaves the room, and you're left gasping, scrambling to make sense of something that simply doesn't make sense. In those first hours, you're not thinking clearly, but there's this ache, this unbearable ache that wraps itself around you. And that ache, it doesn't go away. Grief is like that. It's this constant, suffocating presence that you can't shake, no matter how much you try. I can tell you, the days that followed, well, they all blurred together. The same pain, the same questions, the same emptiness. People tried to comfort me, and I could hear their words, but it was like they'd gone hollow. Their kindness couldn't reach me through this wall of loss and isolation I'd built around myself. When you lose a child, it feels as though every part of who you are comes into question. My faith, my purpose, everything I believed seemed brittle, frail, like it might crumble at any moment. And, well, it often did. Simple things like making a cup of tea or walking outside felt monumental, but not in any sort of triumphant way. No, it was more like staring at a mountain you were too tired to climb. Most days I didn't even try. Isolating. Well, that's putting it mildly. But amidst all that despair, there were these memories of Rosta, of my Roz the boss, that would surface unbidden. He was a force of nature, full of energy, full of life. There's this one image etched in my mind, him tearing through the garden, laughing loudly, like only a child can, his little arms outstretched as though he could fly. He brought so much joy into my life, lit up rooms just by being in them. I mean, I knew it was supposed to be the other way around, right? Me teaching him about the world, about living. But it always felt like Roz was teaching me. His laugh, his mischief, it made everything lighter, brighter. And now, all of that. It's like the color drained out of my world. I clung to those memories, even though sometimes they cut just as deeply as the loss itself. And yet, to let go of them felt unthinkable, like losing him all over again. His voice, that little nickname he'd yell for me, or the way he'd call himself Roz the boss with such pride. Those things, those moments, they became my anchor in a sea of endless, endless sorrow. It took me quite some time, a lot longer than I'd like to admit, before I could bring myself to seek help. Therapy, had always felt, well, like something that wasn't for me. I thought I could manage the pain, shoulder it on my own. But the truth is, I wasn't managing anything. One day, a close friend put their hand on my shoulder and just said, "Frank, this isn't living. You need help." And those words, well, they stuck. I booked the appointment almost reluctantly, but that small act turned out to be one of the most pivotal moments in my life. Oddly enough, the therapy sessions weren't about fixing me or erasing the grief. I mean, that's impossible, right? Instead, it was about helping me find a way to exist with it, to live alongside it without letting it consume me entirely. Slowly, session by session, I began to understand that recovery wasn't about forgetting Rosta or moving on, but about moving forward while carrying his memory with me in a way that didn't weigh me down so much. It was eye-opening. And it's funny, where help can come from. One of the first things my therapist suggested was journaling. At first I thought, what's the point? How's scribbling feelings onto a page going to help anything? But let me tell you, there's something oddly freeing in seeing your thoughts laid out in front of you. Writing became a lifeline, a way to pour out all the confusion and anger and sadness that I couldn't quite put into words with anyone else. I still have those journals, filled to the brim with raw, unfiltered emotion. It's messy, sure, but it's real. Then there was meditation. Now, I've always been the type of bloke who can't sit still for too long, always needing to do something, or so I thought. But meditation taught me something invaluable. It's okay to just be. No action, no fixing, just being present with whatever you're feeling in the moment. I realized that I'd been so focused on pushing the grief away that I hadn't given myself permission to just sit with it. And those moments of stillness, of quiet, they started to bring a kind of peace. Not always, of course, but enough to make a difference. Reconnecting with old friends, too. That was another key step. I'd shut people out, isolated myself, thinking no one could understand what I was going through. But when I finally started reaching out, I was met with warmth, with understanding. It wasn't about them knowing what to say or do, but just them being there. A cup of tea shared with an old mate, a quiet walk in the park. It seemed small, even trivial, but those moments started to feel alive again, bringing a kind of light back into my life. Slowly, the days didn't feel so grey anymore. But learning to live again wasn't easy. I mean, it's not a straight road, is it? Healing is this odd, winding path that takes you places you never expected to go. Some days I'd feel as though I was making progress, taking steps forward, only to find myself dragged back into the depths of grief without warning. And yet, forward wasn't about a straight line. It was about showing up, about trying again, even when it felt impossibly hard. I began to see that the narrative wasn't about simply overcoming grief, but about transforming it, turning the weight of that pain into something more bearable, something meaningful. And while it was all still far from easy, I started to find glimmers of resilience within myself, little sparks that reminded me of the person I could still become. When I first started navigating the labyrinth of grief, the idea of sharing my story, or even pulling myself out of bed most mornings, felt impossible. But as the days turned into months, I began to wonder, could there be something more to this pain? Something beyond just enduring it, It was during one of those restless nights, sitting alone with nothing but the shadows of my thoughts, that the idea began to take hold. What if my grief, this all-consuming, unbearable ache, could serve a purpose beyond just tormenting me? What if, instead of isolating me, it could connect me to others who might be feeling just as lost, just as broken? So, I decided to create this space, a space where people like me, like us, could come together, to share, to listen, and to heal. I wanted it to be a haven, a place that reminded people they weren't alone in their pain, that out in the vast, suffocating darkness, there was at least one small light waiting for them, and that's where this channel was born. It's been remarkable, really. The stories that have been shared here, the courage, the vulnerability, it humbles me every single day. And it's not just the grief, but the hope, too. The resilience that shines through, the connections made between strangers who, in their pain, found solidarity and strength. It's this shared humanity that keeps me going, reminding me why it all matters. And that's when I stumbled upon what I now call the 6th stage of grief. You see, after denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, I found something else, purpose, a way to transform my sorrow into something meaningful, something that could maybe, just maybe, help others find their path forward too. It doesn't mean the pain's disappeared. I don't think it ever really does, but it's shifted. It carries less weight and more direction. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that we are stronger than we realize. In our darkest moments, when the world feels impossibly cold and cruel, there's an ember within each of us that refuses to be snuffed out. And connecting with others, sharing our stories, it fans that ember into a flame that lights the way for ourselves, and perhaps for others too. So here I stand, or rather sit, sharing the story of my son and my journey, not because it erases the grief, but because it honors it. And in doing so, I honor Rosta, my Ros the boss. His laughter, his mischief, his love, it continues to guide me every single day. And that's all for today. Thank you for joining me, for listening, and for being a part of this journey. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever walked this path or know someone who has, I'd love to hear from you. Let's keep sharing, keep connecting, and keep finding purpose, even in the pain. Until next time, take care of yourselves.